Okay, welcome to Growth Uncut, podcast that talks about justice upgrades from around the world, different people having a real sense of kind of collective change and collective impact. And I'm really excited to be here to learn a little bit more about Rescaled. And without further ado, Noah, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and a little bit about Rescaled?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on Growth Uncut. It's really a pleasure to be on this podcast. And just to introduce myself, so my name is Noah Shoshan. I'm based in Brussels, Belgium. I have a background in criminology, and I currently work at RESCALED, which is the European movement for detention houses. Maybe a little bit of background story, how I even got into this in the first place. So I've been with RESCALED for a couple of years now. It's a European NGO which has existed since 2019. That's when it was first launched, together with 5 founding members. And I actually rolled into it during an internship. So when I was studying criminology, I had this guest lecture in my very first year. It was one of my very first lectures, I think, which was just a general introduction to criminology. And we had a guest professor coming in for the guest lecture, and she told us about this idea of these houses and how maybe if we really had to incarcerate people, we could do so in small scale houses, which are community integrated. And really, it was just 5 minutes, I think, of a 2-hour lecture. And I heard that and I thought, that's so interesting. And it sort of makes so much sense, instead of fully isolating people, let's get back together and see how we can collectively address the harm that went wrong. And I was really fascinated by it. But at the time, it was a Belgian NGO, which still exists today and is our Belgian partner, Visa Tweede Huizen, who was really working on this. And I had it sort of in the back of my mind, but then, forgot about it, started my studies. And on my 3rd year, I was looking at the list of possible internships. And that's when I saw their name. And I was like, wait, this was this great story of these houses and completely rethinking the concept of incarceration. And it was just after COVID. We were sort of still in a semi-lockdown. And I thought, you know what, maybe this is the time. I should just try and get in touch with them, see if I can do that internship. Wasn't really expecting too much. And it was actually, I was really lucky, and I'm really glad I decided to do that, because I sort of came in at the time where Rescaled was just starting off as a professional NGO and as a movement, and really looking into, what is the mission and vision, and what do we want to achieve together, and how are we going to achieve that? And so I was doing my internship with the Belgian member and sort of helping at the European level as well. And then I just stuck around. So I stuck around as a student, helping out with social media. And now I've been working full time for almost 3 years in the European office of Rescaled. So I sort of, rolled into it by chance, but I always like to say I grew with the movement, and I've seen it evolve, and I've seen all the questions and challenges and aspirations for what it is that we want to do, which I can talk a bit more later. But the main goal of Rescaled and mission is to replace large prison institutions with detention houses that are small scale, differentiated, and community integrated. And so that's part of my role, helping coordinate the European movement and seeing what type of knowledge do we have on these detention houses.
It just sounds wonderful. And I remember the first time I heard about Rescaled and was just like, this is incredible. And then realizing that there were so many countries that were on board with it. It was something that just really gave me hope that things are happening, people are connecting, we're having a shared vision. So Rescaled is, I've celebrated a lot, particularly within our approved premises kind of work that we do nationally, the kind of halfway houses that we have over in England, because it's just so refreshing, and it's everything that, we would want it to be. That is different to incarceration in the sense of in prison institutions. So you've talked a little bit about the mission. So in terms of upgrade, tell us a little bit about what would you love that to be? And maybe something around the values, I guess, of Rescale, because it sounds like the values of the detention houses are actually quite different to maybe the values that we currently hold around prison. So a little bit about that would be really great. So what are your upgrades? What would you love to see?
That's a great question. The main upgrade we would want to see with Rescaled is, of course, replacing large prison institutions with detention houses. It's very important to stress the word replacement, because the idea is bringing about systemic change, really changing the system, changing how we execute deprivation of liberty, if that's really necessary as a last resort. What does that look like? What does this detention space look like in the community? And not so much creating an alternative system or a parallel system even to large prison institutions. So it's not simply about implementing some houses here and there. It's really bringing about a broader change, which is about so much more than even detention houses. It's how the whole system functions and who comes into it and how we view punishment and how communities and societies take up that collective responsibility. So it's really important to stress that what we're pushing as an NGO is that replacement. And I think it's really important for us to take on that role, because obviously systemic change is incredibly hard. It takes a really long time. It demands a lot of effort, investment, hope, and belief from all the people who are involved. And so we have that unique role of advocates and of a group of change makers, of pushing for that replacement, knowing that, in reality, in the day-to-day, it's not that straightforward. And I think it's important to be realistic about that, but sort of bringing that idea, if that's where we want to be in the long term, that would be it. And I think that goes along that upgrade of replacing these large prison institutions with a space that's in the community that really allows people to spend their time in a meaningful way, but provides a better environment, not only for residents, but also local neighbors, their families, their social networks, and staff as well, is really important. And that would go along with other parts of justice reform, such as incarcerating less individuals, for example. And it's even a necessity, because we can see that all these systems worldwide are under so much pressure, and pressure can open doors and it can be sort of an opportunity for change. But at the same time, to really bring about sustainable change and achieve that system change, we do need to relieve the pressure as well. And that's quite important. But we also know that this obviously doesn't happen overnight. And also looking at Europe and the various countries, there's so many different political climates and legal frameworks, and even the prison systems still differ. While there is a lot of things that they have in common, and we have a lot of shared frameworks and shared European values, there's so many differences. And we see differences as well in how far the developments are when it comes to detention houses and various houses. So we know it doesn't happen overnight, and it could be something that takes 20, 50 years. It's kind of hard to predict, of course. So I think there's smaller upgrades along the way that we're taking. And part of that, what RESCALED has always felt very strongly about, is the idea that it's, we're not just a professional organization. There's also a movement. There's a movement of people who might be formally part of RESCALED, but even who are just our external partners from various groups. So that could be citizens, that's fellow advocates, that's policymakers, that's people from the judicial system, experienced experts, for example, people who have former lived experience. And there's so many different groups of people, academics as well, who make up a part of the movement. And by that, I mean not only people who are fully pushing for it, but also people who are critical, who are challenging it, who are asking questions, and how do we do this? And bringing together these various voices is really at the core of the everyday work that we do, because we feel like by connecting people, whether that's to produce new knowledge or share experiences, we can really move forward, and we can also change with the systems, because that's a really core component for bringing about systemic change. So these values of really including the different voices, and maybe sometimes doing the unconventional and just sitting people down saying, let's put these people together at a table and let's have that discussion of how we can do it, is very important to RESCALED.
How lovely. And I don't know, it just, I feel really energized just listening to you. I think there's just something that you mentioned there about hope and the importance of hope in terms of creating a movement that has that momentum that enables us to move forward, even if it is, like you say, 1% at a time. Hope is really important. We do a lot of work in quite hopeless places where people feel quite powerless and burnt out and disillusioned by the service currently, or the system currently. And so what is it, do you feel? What are you seeing that gives you hope? What are you seeing in terms of the advancements that you've made within RESCALED that gives you hope? Yeah, let's share some of that with our listeners so that we can inject them with a little bit of hope.
With pleasure. I mean, when I first heard about this idea of detention houses, it sparked something inside of me. I heard it, I was passionate. I thought, I want to read more about it, and what would that look like, and does it exist? And then when I got involved more closely during my internship, and then also working with the people who made up RESCALED at that time, which was way fewer than today. We've grown quite significantly with many great organizations in 20 European countries now. I realized that it was quite tricky. because it wasn't even that people were reacting as like, oh, that's not possible, or it's not going to make any sense, and how do you want to bring about that change? People weren't even aware of what that was. What is a detention house? What does that look like? And why a maximum of 30 people? And how would they add value to the neighborhood? And so a lot of that work was really bringing about awareness, which was the first step, and explaining, what that could look like. And of course, if you're sort of trying to change a system, you will have different reactions. Some people really align with that. Some people don't align with that as much. And it's been quite interesting navigating it now, because there is a lot of support that the concept and the idea and the vision has gained from people, but even at a political level, for example, from ministers of justice and so forth, adopting this idea of, yes, let's look more into small scale detention. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what kind of data, evidence, or, expertise we need to bring this about. And at the same time, there's still criticism and skepticism, which is okay, and it's necessary, and it makes sense, because it isn't easy to propose a change. And we do have lots of practice and evidence that we can base it on, but we also need to go through that change and these new experiences to then evaluate and see how's that working, and to have lessons learned, and how do you communicate with the local community and say, hey, we would want to open a detention house here. You learn from these experiences. So it also takes a certain level of courage. I remember we had a conference 2 years ago, the first European symposium on detention houses, and there was the former Minister of Justice from Lithuania, Evelina Dobrovolska, and they have really turned around their prison system in the past, and they have many halfway houses there now. And so she was asked in this panel at the conference is, how did you do it? How did you navigate it all? And she said, what it really was political courage to try something new, to take the risk of maybe going wrong somewhere, to take the risk of failing, and to be open to the opportunity to learn. And she said, it wasn't about me. It was about taking those steps for the system and for the country. And to this day, so many people who were present at that symposium reference her saying that, and saying it's about courage. It's about having a culture of failure, of learning together with our mistakes. And that's something that I'm really seeing quite a lot. And what I've noticed personally in the change over the years, as I said, at first we had to introduce this idea and even explain what is it about and why are we even proposing this change. And obviously nowadays we know what is wrong with our current European prison systems, and we know what we want to change, but it's really hard to change it in practice. And what I've noticed is that now people don't say why, but they ask how. How do we do this? How much would it cost? What would be the next steps? What would be these reactions? Who do we need to get involved? And that gives me hope, and that shows me that there's a significant commitment. There's so much willingness among these various groups of people who are somehow in some shape or form involved with justice. And I think honestly, that's the best that you can ask for. If people are open and wanting to learn, we go from there and we'll figure it out along the way.
Yeah, I love that. Courage is so important, isn't it? And I think there's something for me about when we think about Justice 1.0, all the harms that we've inherited and are kind of can be really deep rooted and embedded in our norm. You're right. That's the thing about prison. It becomes normal when it's a hostile environment, people see violence and just say, well, that's just an everyday that we're seeing we're experiencing this environment. So there's something for me about seeing that something can be different and having that kind of moral courage as well to say, do you know what? We can do this better if we just take that risk. And it is risk taking, isn't it? In the sense of we are quite, particularly in England, maybe quite risk averse. We've certainly become quite a risk averse kind of, either whether that's politically or whether that's in practice. But courage is the antidote for that, isn't it? It's something that's going to enable us to stand up and say, this isn't right. Like, it may feel normal to us now because we're institutionalized, but it isn't right. And, we're willing to understand the how and how we can make it better. And I think that does take courage, but that also takes vulnerability, right? That's a measure of courage. Is that vulnerability, as Brené Brown would say. And that's really hard, isn't it? In an environment, our prison systems, and globally from my experience within prisons, is that it's very much this sense that we have to be strong and we have to not show weakness, and all of that protection that we've kind of created for ourselves to survive this really punitive environment. taking some of that down and talking about the challenges and accepting that we didn't get it right, but that's okay, and reframing it in that way, that is something that is really courageous. So it's lovely to hear you talk about that, and it does bring hope. 20 countries, that is just significant, isn't it? And I just really hope that we can, it's about connecting those dots, isn't it, and getting that shared vision. And it sounds like people are starting to build that and persevere, which is what hope gives us. It gives us the energy to keep going, doesn't it? Which is what we all need. So absolutely wonderful. What about your hopes for the future? So in terms of Rescaled, what are the next steps? Is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners around what you're doing, and how we can be part of it, or how the listeners can be part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest parts in my work in the day-to-day, and the people I work with, who are they're great for so many reasons, from so many different backgrounds and coming in from perspectives and different types of experience. I always say the most important part is to keep reflecting on the work that we're doing, on what we're proposing, why we're proposing it, on having these vulnerable and difficult discussions. That really is a core part of our work. And it's also a core part of the work when we think of, if we want evidence-based policy, what type of evidence are we proposing? And so we're also looking outside of only academic evidence and looking at, working with, for example, experienced experts, but also looking at, there is many facilities and detention facilities that already exist in many European countries that we weren't even aware of 6 years ago when Rescaled was launched. And it's sort of been a confirmation of, this isn't a new idea. It's a vision that transcends borders and that already exists elsewhere. But like you said, we're just connecting the dots, and we really want to invite anyone who's willing to contribute in a way, to think with us, to have discussions with us, to say, hey, I'm doing a part of a work which might be really relevant, not only for the narrative building aspect of it, but also of the actual implementation of detention houses. So answering these questions, how are we doing it? And finding that solution at a local level. So I think part of that is, we do have quite a few ongoing projects that might be interesting to follow along, which would be the Bridge project, that's specifically on the idea of detention houses for young adults, so 18 to 25-year-olds. I think this is a really important group of people to focus on. Oftentimes it's first time incarceration. So if you're interested in that, I think that could be something to get in touch with us about. Another project, which is Resize, which is really about the training of staff as well, and the skills and competencies that they need to thrive and function in an environment. And that training might look differently from what they've previously received in the institutions that we currently have. And so that would be one. And then something new that we're working on and that we've launched just recently is something called the RESCALED Academy. So we were looking for a place to centralize and disseminate a lot of the existing evidence, but also to take all those people in the movement and work together to co-produce new knowledge on detention houses. And so the RESCALED Academy is an online website that you're able to find through Google, or our main website. If you go to rescaled.org, you'll be able to find the RESCALED Academy through there as well. And so what we're doing there with the movement, building an online library, which ideally provides only open access resources, and that could be reports, presentations, videos, academic articles, and so forth, that are relevant to the topic of detention houses. And it's also the place where we'll be sharing more about knowledge workspaces, which will be these Rescaled knowledge workspaces that are a way to co-produce that new knowledge, but also a space of connection. So again, bringing people together who are connected to this topic. And so we launched our first knowledge workspace on women, and we'll be launching a few more in the future on lived experience and sustainable development. And it would be really great if anyone who's listening and who's interested to contribute could reach out to myself. That would be noah.shoshan@rescaled.org, or via LinkedIn, or through our websites. You're also able to get in touch with us depending on what area or what topic you're interested in. We'd be really interested to collaborate in any case.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And for those that are listening, if you didn't catch those, we're going to write them in the blurb if you're listening to this just as an audio, or if you're watching it on YouTube. So we will give you all the information just to make it super easy and seamless. And thank you so much for coming and talking with us. It's wonderful. It's inspiring. It brings me hope too. And I just really am excited about the future in terms of what the possibilities could be, and we would love to support in any way. And I guess the podcast is part of that, just to celebrate you, celebrate Rescaled, and I guess when we talked about what we really wanted to say in this podcast, it was about don't get stuck in the darkness sometimes. Sometimes it's about looking to the light, seeing the good stuff that's happening and using that as a way to refuel and energize us, a bit like the sun. So yeah, I hope we've spread a little sunshine on people today, and just to encourage people to come and connect with us as well. If you want to get in touch with us and learn a little bit more about Justice 2.0, have a look on our website, www.growtransformbelong.com. And if you want to come and feature on the podcast, then again, please do get in touch, talk about your own upgrades. Or if you want to just interview someone in your community or someone in your organization and you want to submit a podcast, please do get in touch with us, because we co-own this upgrade, and that's what it's all about. I think in order for a movement to take shape, it's about us owning it and co-creating and co-defining it together. So it has really resonated with me in terms of the work that you're doing. And thank you so much, Noah, for your precious time to come and talk to us about Rescaled and the magic that is. So thank you so much.
It's really my pleasure. Thanks.
Bye, folks. Take care. Have a wonderful day.